Hello, it's Dan, the parts professor with Midwest Aftermarket, and I'm here today to do an unboxing of the Stage 1 kit from Edge and give you a little bit of a breakdown of what these different products are all about. We love Kyle here at Midwest Aftermarket, and he's quite the hoot. But some of you have said on the YouTubes that occasionally he doesn't get super in depth with like the research or exactly what all the products are about. And so we thought we'd do a little more of an in-depth review today and see how this goes over. Please let us know in the comments. Be nice. I'm vulnerable. Okay, so what we have in the Stage 1 kit, and they do offer a Stage 1 and Stage 2. Edge has said that the Stage 1 is meant to be kind of like a beginner's dive into programming, if you will. And what they've done here is paired the Evolution CTS2 with the Jammer cold air intake system. What's nice about these two is that since they're both made by Edge, they're actually designed to work together, right? I'm just going to go ahead and get out the Jammer here so that you can see it. Obviously, the CTS2 is right there too. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about this particular cold air intake, why it's a good investment, what I know about it from the extensive research that I have done. So it does have a little pamphlet here. We've got the actual box. Inside of the cold air intake box is the actual filter. It does come in dry filter, which we have here, and also an oil filter, the kind of red kind, which I actually recommend. But if you don't like getting your hands dirty, you don't want to play around with oil, this dry one will work just fine. Also, if you're in a particularly dry climate, you're going to want to stick with the dry. The oiled filters get super dirty super fast if you're in a really dusty place. We're here in the Midwest, either or would probably work for us. Some of us prefer oiled, some of us prefer dry. It just depends on how much maintenance you really want to do. But pro tip, that oiled filter does quite a good job, technically better than the dry filter does. All right? They're both the same size, but that oiled filter is going to let more airflow get through than your traditional dry. So both of these are reusable filters too, so make sure you don't toss those out, or nobody who's working on your particular vehicle ever tosses it out by accident. We got this nice top here, and I hope you can see that it says Edge on it. Of course, that fits over the top. This does just take the place of your sort of stock air intake. And we got a hose in here, and then there's bunches of clamps and such. So that pretty much does it for what's in the box. So let's talk a little bit about what's important about what's in the box. So as far as the Stage 1 kit goes, part of the reason why we're promoting it and excited about it is that it saves you money as a consumer. Chances are, if you're just getting started in aftermarket parts, if you're interested in cold air intake, you're interested in a performance tuner, these are products you're probably going to want to get anyway. They pair nicely together, and they're going to save you between like $100 and $140, depending on whether or not you're a diesel truck owner or if you drive a gas truck, right? So just to throw out some numbers here, the diesel version, for instance, of this tuner is like $680, right? And the cold air intake's about $400, but when we bundle them together, they're like $950, right? And some change, right? So you end up saving a considerable amount of money, and you get two products that do pair nicely together. Again, the CTS2 is designed to work with this cold air intake. Of course, it could work with all the sensors that are already installed on your truck and most aftermarket parts, but it's nice to have these things working in synergy together. Right? So some of the things that I wanted to mention, and again, this is way more detailed than you might actually really need, is exactly how a cold air intake works, what the purpose of it is, and why you need one. Right? What I've seen in doing my research is that a lot of people online think cold air intake, that's all about horsepower gain. And you are going to gain some horsepower probably by just installing a cold air intake. But here's the thing, that's not actually the primary function of this particular device, right? So if you go and add on a cold air intake and you're expecting to get massive performance boost just from that, slow down, right? You're gonna see some performance boosts from this kit, but most of it's gonna come from your tuner, right? Most of the performance boost that you get from this particular piece has to do with airflow, right? So chances are this is going to be bigger than your stock air filter. More surface area, this means that it can take in more air, more oxygen, right? And that is going to boost your horsepower some. In my research, I've come to the conclusion that what you're going to see horsepower-wise is probably between 1 and 5% boost. And a lot of times whenever you go on different websites, and I'm not knocking any competitors or anything, lots of products that we sell here on the website, it will say you're going to gain X horsepower. And I need you to understand that that's based upon a particular engine in a particular vehicle. Right? So if a particular company is saying you're going to gain 15 horsepower, they're thinking about that particular truck. And your truck might be different. Your truck might have a different size engine. Your truck just might have different aftermarket parts. You might see a different kind of boost. Right? So I don't like saying you're going to gain X horsepower. If I had to guess, 5. Right? But it's a lot easier for me to say you're going to gain between 1 and 5% horsepower. Right? Now, to just give you some numbers on that. Let's imagine that you are driving a 2011 Dodge Ram 3500 turbo diesel with a 3.7 liter Cummins, right? I've got some stats written down here for me. That's why I got my clipboard, so I don't forget, right? Now, factory, and again, this is according to factory, that vehicle should have 350 horsepower stock. It doesn't, just so you know. Those numbers are totally fudged. They're not accurate, all right? But let's assume that's correct. We could then hope to gain somewhere between 3.5 horsepower and 17.5 horsepower by installing this cold air intake onto that particular truck, right? And that might sound like a decent number. Again, I threw out 15 earlier, 15 horsepower, but that kind of gain, like a 1 to 5% gain in horsepower, is actually not something that you as a human being are going to be able to notice and measure from just getting behind the wheel, right? Now, you put it on a dyno, yeah, it's going to show up, right? But you probably won't actually be able to tell that performance gain just by driving the truck, right? Now, you can still brag about it to your friends, and you should, right? My point in emphasizing this is that the cold air intake's primary function isn't horsepower gain. You'll get some, but that's not the primary, right? So, to kind of get into what the cold air intake's really all about, and this should be obvious, but you know, hey, not all of us look into these parts as in-depth as some of us do. And frankly, I probably go overboard sometimes. I have to do a lot of research. I do a lot of riding here at Midwest, and maybe I go way too far in depth. But for me, this was fairly obvious. It's right there in the name. The function of your cold air intake is to bring cold air into your intake. It's like, bam, it's right there, right? And that might not seem like that big of a deal. So I want to explain a little bit about temperature and about why the cold air is important, right? So first, cold air is denser. This means that the particles in the air, and stop me if I get too scientific, the particles in the air get more tight, right? They're packed tighter together, right? Hence, we can get more air into each individual cylinder when the intake opens up, right? This is important because the more air we can get in there, that means the more oxygen we're going to have in there, right? And your O2 sensor, which by the way actually attaches to part of this, I think it's actually right here. Let's point this out real fast. So if you have an O2 sensor, and you should on your truck probably, it's going to attach right here. There's also a place where you can insert a filter monitor if you do have an air filter monitor. And regardless, there's going to be a little grommet here that's going to be on your stock air intake. Make sure you save that and then shove it in here. So don't forget to do that. So that O2 sensor right there, it's going to measure the amount of oxygen that's coming through into your intake. If that oxygen level goes up, say because the air is denser, because it's colder, right? Then the O2 sensor is going to tell your ECU, your engine control unit or engine computer unit, depending on who you're talking to, right, to add more fuel. You get more fuel and more oxygen mixed together, and guess what? That gives you more power, right? And that's where your horsepower gains come in. They aren't astronomical, but there's something, right? And it does make your engine perform better. And what a lot of consumers see too is that with these cold air intakes, you also get a better mixture of fuel to oxygen ratio, which means you'll actually probably save on fuel economy too. Now, before you get all excited about that, if you got your CTS2 tuner in like performance setting with the cold air intake, you're not going to see gains in miles per gallon at all, right? You put it in economy, yeah, right? So bear that in mind too, right? So the key benefit then is the cold air. Not only is that good for that fuel to air ratio, that mixture inside your cylinders, but it's also good for the rest of your engine, right? Your engine gets hot, especially if you're rocking a diesel, right? right? The more hot it gets, the more wear and tear on that engine, the worse it is for your particular vehicle. And that's why you've got lube, that's why you've got the oil in there, right? And that's why you've got engine coolant. So a product like this, Edge's Jammer, is going to keep your engine cooler. And they've actually done the numbers, they ran the dyno to try to figure out exactly what the modifications were from just installing this product on that particular 2011 turbo diesel that I was talking about earlier, right? And it was pretty impressive, right? So let's go ahead and get into that then. So as we dive back into this, I'm actually going to reference another YouTube video. So Edge did a YouTube video showing off this product, the Jammer, like a year or so ago. So check it out. You can Google it and go find it. It's also up on Edge's website. And what they did was they showed you how to install the Jammer. Don't worry, we're probably going to do that too. And come on, we'll have Kyle, so it'll be super fun, right? But on top of that, they did a dyno run. Now, here's the thing about dyno runs. There's a few things that I want you to understand. First, as I already pointed out, this product is not solely about HP gain, about horsepower gains. That's not really its sole purpose. It's about temperature. There's going to be some horsepower gains, but it's not going to be astronomical, right? This isn't you putting a muscle car on the dyno after you put some monster tunes on it and blowing it away, right? You're going to see 4, 5 horsepower gains. That's what you're looking at with this product solo. With them together, maybe 100, 180, right? So especially on a diesel, right? So it's not like you're not going to get any horsepower, but it doesn't come just from the cold air intake. So they did this video, and they did a dyno run with that 2011 turbo diesel with the Cummins engine, and they ran it stock, and then they installed and they ran it with the Jammer, right? And the very first YouTube comment on it, and I kid you not, you can go look this up, is how much horsepower gain, right? Because they didn't point that out in the video, right? They showed the 2 charts, and then they pointed out some temperature sensor changes from the dyno, which is great. Again, that's what this product's about. It's about lowering the temperature at various points throughout your engine, from the intake all the way to the exhaust, right? But they didn't point out the horsepower gains. I felt the exact same way as that YouTube commenter, right? I was like, why didn't they tell me the horsepower gains? That's what it's all about, right? It even says right here on the side of the box that you're going to gain horsepower from this, right? And you are. But they chose not to emphasize that. And it's because that's not what this product's about as much as temperature control, right? So I am going to give you those numbers. They didn't give you the numbers. On that particular make and model, they gained 4.6 horsepower, right? And that might not seem like very much, right? So I went and did some research to try to find out if it was. And it turns out that a bunch of different people have done dyno tests with cold air intakes to try to find out, do you really see a lot of horsepower gain? And there's some interesting findings out there on the interwebs, and you can verify this yourself. You don't have to take my word for it, right? Just do a Google search and look it up, right? How much horsepower am I going to get from a cold air intake, right? And you'll find all kinds of research out there. This is just my own, right? And what I found is that you're probably going to get, again, 1 to 5% gains, right? Which on most vehicles is not going to be even double digits in horsepower, right? And again, that's not going to be noticeable. And that's why a lot of people complain. Like, I put this cold air intake on my truck or on my muscle car, and I didn't see a massive horsepower gain. And that's why. You did see a horsepower gain, it just wasn't noticeable, right? Secondly, they found almost no horsepower gains whenever you take a cold air intake and you add it to a vehicle that already has a turbocharger on it. And that should be a given if you think about how these products work, right? Now, I'm not saying that cold air intakes and turbochargers don't pair well together, because they do. They work great together. Here's the thing. Most of the time, your turbocharger, it's going to give you upwards of like maybe 50% horsepower gain. That's massive. Versus this is going to give you 1 to 5. Think about that. You pair those 2 products together, and if you already have the turbocharger on and you've got this massive horsepower spike, and then you put this on expecting another massive horsepower spike, you're not going to see that, right? Secondly, they're both doing similar things, right? So your turbocharger is, of course, hooked into your exhaust. Your exhaust fumes spin out of your vehicle, right? And they spin a turbine. That turbine then spins a turbine on the other end of your turbocharger, and that's going to kind of suck or vacuum the air into your intake faster. It's going to allow you to pressurize and squeeze more air, hence more oxygen, into each and every cylinder. That's what your cold air intake does too, right? Now, guess which one does it more efficiently? It's obvious. That turbo does it more, right? Because it's vacuuming. This is just opening up airflow. It's giving you the best possible airflow that you can get from outside your vehicle or from as far away from your actual engine as possible into the actual intake system. The way that the cold air intake then makes your horsepower better is that it is farther away. It's not as hot of a source of air, right? It also tends to have bigger piping. As you can see right there, that's massive, right? Don't do it, Heather. Don't say it, right? So it reduces any sort of resistance or friction to let that air get through that tubing quickly, right? And then the turbo is going to suck that air in too. So what you would see just with the cold air intake is easier flow of that air. With the turbo, it's easier flow in the suction too, right? So they work well in tandem, but you're going to see more gains out of a turbo than you are out of just a cold air intake. And here's the big shocker. That 2011 Cummins, that Dodge Ram I've been talking about, it's a turbo diesel. So it has a turbocharger on it. So gaining 4.6 horsepower by adding on this is incredibly impressive, right? So bear all that in mind if you end up going and doing dyno tests or trying to find out exactly how much horsepower you're gaining from just adding on a cold air intake. And that's for any cold air intake, frankly. But I'm giving you the numbers for the Jammer, and I'm impressed so far, right? The other important numbers, and they do show this on there, is that they did lower significantly various temperatures throughout the exhaust and intake system. So just to rattle them off for you here, at the exhaust level, the exhaust gas temperature dropped 74.5 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just adding this on, your exhaust temperature. That's a lot. Right? You go into the engine coolant temperature and they drop 15 degrees. That's a lot too. And then at the intake manifold, where your air is actually going in, it dropped 5 degrees. Now that might not sound like very much, but imagine that 5 degrees, that start here and then getting into the sensor that will be attached here, that's what translates into all of that decrease in temperature down the road. Right? Now, why is this important? The decrease in air temperature at your intake manifold, that's what's responsible for your horsepower gains. So we've already talked about that, we've already covered that, and again, that's what most people are interested in. How much horsepower am I going to gain? And that's great. It is essential and does help the rest of the system too. But your decrease at coolant level too helps your oil to better lubricate your engine. And you might not think about this whenever you're installing aftermarket parts, but they're better parts. They're better for your engine. So you're going to see less wear and tear, less heating up of that oil, and it's going to function more at optimal levels over the life of your vehicle. And it's not often something that we can say that by adding this particular product, you could increase the lifespan of your engine, right? Especially if you're rocking a diesel, those diesels get hot. Right? Finally, you've got your exhaust temperature, and again, you might not think about that too much. That might actually be something you might want to monitor with the Evolution, by the way. Your exhaust temperature, if it gets too high, you can run into all sorts of problems with your engine. In fact, it can be a great sensor to monitor to see if something is wrong with your engine, right? Because if that exhaust is getting too hot, you could start running into sensors that are malfunctioning, that are starting to melt. You wear out gaskets faster, you heat up your oil. Nothing functions optimally if your temperature is in the red, right? And some of that's obvious, but these are definitely things that you should keep in mind. And dropping that exhaust temperature by 74 degrees, that's pretty impressive, right? From just adding on one product, right? So, while I know those numbers aren't super sexy, like when people talk about aftermarket, they talk about horsepower and torque, right? And I get that. They are fairly impressive numbers, right? If you're into this particular kit, if you're looking at the Stage 1 kit for horsepower gains, look here. This is it right here, right? The Evolution CTS2 is where you're going to get that. And on your diesel, you're going to see about upwards of 180 horsepower gain. Let's see, let me get the specific torque numbers here. I do have them written down as well. Your torque gain on a diesel is going to be upwards of 440 foot-pounds. It's crazy. You want to kick this thing into tow mode, you're going to have that torque, right? On your gas model, you're not going to see nearly as many gains, probably closer to 50 horsepower and probably 50 torque too, right? But hey, we're all rocking diesels, right? Not me. Ooh, fail. Anyway, getting into the Evolution tuner then, this is a nice tuner for beginners. It's a nice tuner for people who don't actually want to be getting onto the computer and are going somewhere to get custom tunes made. And I want to point that out right away. You are not going to be loading custom tunes on here. This comes preloaded with 3 to 4 different tunes. They're very easy. You just pick the tune that you want for the occasion, right? So we got 4 levels. First thing you do whenever you pop this out and you update it on your computer first, then you're going to plug it into your ODB2 port underneath your dash, right? And then it's going to record your stock ECU, your stock computer settings for your vehicle. That's important, especially if you're going to ever find yourself, going to an EPA emissions test or having to take your vehicle, your truck back to the dealership for any sort of maintenance or work. You're going to want to kick it back over to stock. Legally, they can't really do anything to you because of the Magnuson-Moss Act, and you can check out our blog for the full coverage of that stuff and exactly how that works, right? I'm not going to get into that here, but legally, you're in the clear, but look, avoid a hassle, kick it back over into stock, right? And that setting's going to be right in here under Performance Tunes, the first setting, the very top, stock. You can always go back to it. If you're ever going to trade in your vehicle, or if you're going to sell it and you're selling it to someone who's doesn't get aftermarket, I mean, you're selling it to someone who does get aftermarket, include the tuner and explain to them how awesome it is, right? And definitely talk about the jammer too, right? It's just going to increase the the resale value of your vehicle. But if you're selling it to somebody who doesn't get that kind of stuff, kick it back to stock. Nothing wrong with that, right? Then you're going to have 3 or 4 more levels. Your first level is going to be economy mode. And a lot of consumers like that, especially if you're using your truck as your daily driver. If you're commuting to work every day with your truck, this is going to be a great product for you. This is anecdotal. This is not scientific, but I've read numerous people saying that this particular product, the Evolution CTS2, they gained upwards of 15 miles per gallon by kicking it over to eco and driving mostly highway miles every day. And I mean, if you have a truck, you know how astronomical 15 miles per gallon is. Now, it's not going to perform like it normally does if you're in that mode, but that's about maximizing your fuel efficiency, right? So definitely try it. I know whenever I first started playing around with any sort of tuners, I was not into the eco mode at all, and now that I'm more of an adult and I realize how much things cost, eco mode is great for your daily drive, for real. Okay. Next, you're going to get your towing mode. That's going to maximize your torque, and again, you're looking at upwards of 440 foot-pounds of torque added to your diesel model. It's pretty astronomical. It's really going to help you with towing. Right? Your third level there is going to be your performance, and that's where you get all the horsepower gains. It maximizes horsepower. That's what it's all about. And again, with this particular model, you could be looking at upwards of 180 horsepower gain. So you pair these two things together, you might be looking at 185, maybe 190, depending on the vehicle. So again, pretty astronomical. Definitely something you'll be able to feel. Again, way different than, say, a 5% gain that you just get from getting cold air intake. That's part of the reason why I think Edge has figured out that they should pair these two products together, because they synergize, they work well together. Right? All right, there's all sorts of other great features that I definitely want to mention about the CTS2, but that's probably the first thing that you need to know, that there's 3 to 4 different levels. If there is a 4th level, it'll be extreme mode. And it seems to depend on the make and model and year of the vehicle, frankly. Extreme mode, from what I can tell, tries to up the torque and the horsepower even more, which is extreme, obviously. Right? So check that out if you have it, and definitely report to us and make comments in the YouTube if you do have extreme mode and what you think about it. Do you prefer performance mode? Is that where you like to ride? Are you mostly in eco, or is extreme your jam? That's what you're down with. Right? Other things that I think are really cool about this particular tuner, it has all sorts of customization. So you can download the MyStyle software onto your PC. At the time of this recording, I do not believe MyStyle actually works on your Mac. This is important, okay? If you only have a Mac or an Apple computer, you're not going to be able to update this, right? So you might want to look elsewhere. Love this product. No support yet for Mac. I hear maybe they're working on it. If they do get it figured out, we'll make sure to make an update or post in the comments. But as of right now, as of this recording, no Mac software updates. Hey, it's cool. Just steal your buddy's computer sometime and update it, or go over to your friend's house and update it, or go to your mom's and dad's, whatever. The library has computers. Do it, right? You just plug it in, USB port, very simple interface, and you download the software. The Fusion software will be used to do the updates, and the MyStyle software will let you customize the backgrounds and the images. What I like about that is that you can actually take images that are from your home computer or from your camera, right? From your phone. right? So if you want to put a picture like your family as the background, or if you have some sort of cool custom logo, like if I wanted to put Midwest Aftermarket behind ours, I could, right? There's also all sorts of tinting that you can do in there, and you can do some of this stuff directly from the device as well, right? Just not the updating, right? So that's really, really neat software. There's two different gauge screens whenever you power this on. There's going to be a home screen that has all sorts of different gauges on it, upwards of 9 different ones. Each one of them can be digital, analog, or a combination of the two. And by analog, I mean like an old school needle or a more digital needle that can kind of show you where you're going as far as the gauge settings are concerned. But some of them are just straight digital too if you just want the numbers. Personally, it depends on what I'm monitoring, right? For some things like temperature sensors, I probably want a needle. But for other things like, my mileage coach, I'm probably good with just the numbers, right? So what's nice about that is customizable specifically to you. So if you like one particular gauge over the other, set it up that way. It's completely up to you. Totally customizable on your end. Right? All right, other really cool things. So that's very cosmetic. For me, in case you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a numbers guy. Right? So I already told you a little bit about the MyStyle software, right? So it also has this function that I like to call the dyno light, and that's definitely not an appropriate thing to say because it's not a dynamometer at all. But it does do some similar tests. So instead of having to take your vehicle to a place that has a dyno, reserving time, paying money for somebody to run the tests, you can do some fun little tests right at home or on a closed course, drag strip, the back roads out in front of your house. Someplace safe. Definitely you don't want to be doing these tests like the 0 to 60 or the quarter mile test, someplace where you might run into another vehicle, right? Let me just quickly run through what those are. If you go to the main menu on your Evolution, you'll be able to find the performance testing, the records, and the data log function. All three of these are great if you're really into numbers like me, right? So the records just records the peaks of any number of different parameters that you set. So if you want to monitor some sort of temperature sensor, you can do that. You want to monitor RPMs, you can do that. Right? A lot of people like this for like towing, or if you're doing like a cross-country thing, you can see like what was my peak. It also tracks how fast you're going. So if you don't want somebody to know that, you can clear that out like every time you're done driving. I'm just playing. So definitely play around with that, see what you can record. It can store a number of different things, and it can back them up into your computer too. Right? Secondly, you got data logs, and I think this one can store upwards of 5 different data points. Each one runs for 10 minutes. So you have to actually set this up. You have to hit the button on the actual device, and then it will start recording. This is great if you do like truck pulls, or if you do racing, drag racing, or trying to get lap times. Great for that, right? I know, truck drivers, we don't do a lot of lap racing, but maybe you do truck pulls, right? This could be a great function then. It can store upwards of 5 different runs, if you will. Then it will back up that data directly to your computer using that MyStyles program, right? So if you want to see the numbers, like where did I peak out, right? You can do all of that with this particular tuner. Right? Finally, you got your performance testing, and again, this one's kind of just for fun, I guess. But it has 3 different tests that you can run. First, it's got a 0 to 60. So if you actually set up the test, it'll actually run through the Christmas tree, if you know what I'm talking about, dragsters, right? And then whenever it gets to green, you got to gun it, right? And then it measures how quickly you got from 0 to 60 miles per hour. I just love that function. That seems so fun, right? It's almost like drag racing your buddy without your buddy being there, right? Next, you've got your quarter mile run. So if you're into that, you're into doing time trials, seeing how fast you can do a quarter mile. It's very similar to the 0 to 60. Finally, you've got a horsepower one. This is what I mean by the dyno light. Now, to do the horsepower test, you have to input what your approximate weight of your vehicle is. So you might actually want to take it someplace and have it professionally weighed, or go to like a weigh station. And so that is kind of an added thing. You could also just guesstimate, but the further off that actual weight number is, the further off your horsepower rating is going to be. Right? But it does a very similar function where you hit the button, Christmas tree comes up, and then you run through what the test tells you to do, and at the end it calculates what your max horsepower is. So it is really like a peak-to-peak dyno horsepower measurement. Now it's not nearly as accurate as the dyno, and I do not want to imply that, but who's got time to go to dyno every weekend, right? Imagine this. You add on a new part. Like let's say you add on the jammer, and you want to see how much horsepower gain I got. Cool. Beforehand, you run your little horsepower test with the CTS2, and as long as you kept the weight setting at exactly the same, afterwards, you run it with the jammer on, and you see if you got any gain. And again, don't expect massive gain. That's just an example, but you will probably see some. Right? So I thought that was a really cool function. Other minor things that are on here, well, maybe not minor. You got a speedometer correction. So if you've got a lifted truck and you've got monster tires on it, you're definitely going to want to check out that function because it will correct your speedometer and let you know what actual speed you're traveling at, instead of the stock tire speed, right, which would be way off probably, especially if you got really big tires, right? It's also got an accelerometer. This could be fun when like you're towing, if you want to know how steep an incline was and maybe what gear to get into. That could be really useful. If you've heard that term before, it's also present in like your smartphones. So when you're playing like motion games where you turn the cell phone around, that's the accelerometer that does all that. Only this accelerometer is about like your truck's level fun, right? It's also got a maintenance minder, which is pretty standard. Your truck probably already has one, but this one will make a notification pop up at the top of the display, and you'll be able to pull down, see what maintenance you're supposed to keep up on. I like this function because my stock truck, sometimes it tells me to change the oil when like I'm not quite ready to change the oil yet, or maybe it'll tell you to rotate the tires when like you don't need to rotate the tires yet. With this, you can actually custom set up that kind of stuff, so you don't have to just follow the minder that's on your dash, right? This one's probably going to be more accurate to what you want it to remind you about. Right? You can also set that up to make sounds on certain reminders or whenever certain gauges reach certain levels. Definitely worth checking out. There's also a mileage coach, so if you really do want to maximize your miles per gallon, you're going to want to turn that setting on. The mileage coach takes up just one gauge location, so you could monitor, again, 8 other things and the mileage coach. For my daily drive, I highly recommend that. I think you'll see the most miles per gallon gain if you're using the mileage coach too. It's not for everybody. Give it a shot. Try it out. Okay? Finally, it does read your diagnostic troubleshooting codes. So if you like to clear out your own codes like I do, or if you just like to see what the check engine code is before you take it into like your mechanic or try to fix it yourself like me and then totally screw it up, definitely check that out. The diagnostic function is excellent on this piece. And of course, you can clear out the code yourself, right? With that, that's pretty much the conclusion of what the Evolution is capable of. It's a very wonderful starter tuner with some great canned tunes already on it. Again, you can't load custom tunes. It just comes with the tunes on it. But I think you'll be impressed with all of the different levels that are available. And again, it pairs really nicely with the jammer here, this cold air intake. And I'm impressed with the numbers. You've heard the horsepower numbers and you've heard what cold air intake's all about. If you're interested in this product, definitely check it out on our website, midwestaftermarket.com, or give us a call. And by all means, please comment. Please let us know if you like this video. Was this too technical? Should I go even more scientific? Do we need charts and graphs in the background? What do you need? Because we want to give you whatever kind of research you want about these products so you're the best informed consumer you can be. With that, I'm Dan, and it's been a pleasure. And thanks again for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and again, comment.